Hello, everybody. Sorry for just a couple minutes late. We just always, wonderful technology, always just so much fun. And dealing with it, I know everybody's dealing with it so much more than usual right now. So we just want to thank you so much again for joining us. Today's webinar is hosted by Travefy Academy with our amazing presenter, Thomas Carpenter, who I will introduce in just a minute. But I do just want to take a moment, just to thank everybody for each being here and for joining us here today. If you've been with us throughout the past couple weeks, well, actually like a month and a couple weeks, feels like a lot longer than that, but we've been doing a lot of these webinars that we hope are really helpful. We've been trying to put together webinars that are helpful for the tricky time of COVID-19, but also help you into the future of after COVID-19 too. So we hope that today's webinar with Thomas will be just another helpful resource into navigating this uncertain time, and then to just knowing what to do moving forward and to have this knowledge. This is a great time to get that education and learn everything you can. So we hope it's really helpful. To quickly introduce myself though, if this is your first time joining Travefy Academy webinar, then we're super excited for you to be here. But my name is Stephanie Grice, and I'm the Senior Client Champion and Education Coordinator here at Travefy. Now, before we chat with Thomas, I do want to quickly give you an overview of Travefy Academy in case if this is your first time, and just what to expect on today's webinar. Because, and again, if you've joined us before, you've heard this, but for those of you who are new, I just kind of want to tell you that Travefy Academy really exists to provide powerful education experiences and help fulfill our mission to power the success of travel professionals. So Travefy Academy does not focus on Travefy as a product. So you won't hear anything about Travefy software in these webinars, but instead, Travefy Academy is a free resource for all of travel advisors to learn and grow your travel business. And because we get to work with amazing advisors and organizations every day, just like Thomas here, we get to partner with these experts across the travel industry to provide these free educational webinars. And these webinars are not commercial in nature to promote those organizations, nor does Travefy ever accept compensation for partnerships. So that's just telling you a little bit about what we do, what we're here for. But before we dive in here and I introduce Thomas, I do want to do a couple webinar housekeeping things. So the first thing that's the most important is this webinar is being recorded. So if you have to hop off, or if you have a colleague or a friend who was unable to join, that's okay. We actually record these, and an email will be sent to everyone afterwards with a link to watch the replay. So again, feel free to forward that to any friends or colleagues, but if they did register, they'll still receive that recording, as well as all of you who are here today as well. I do also want to mention that you can use the question box to ask any questions throughout this webinar. So if you think of something, a question you want to ask Thomas, just go ahead and feel free and add that to the question box. And at the end, we'll try to go through as many questions as we can and ask those. Now, with all that being said, I'm really excited to introduce our speaker and presenter today, Thomas Carpenter. So to tell you a little bit about Thomas Carpenter is an attorney in private practice representing clients in the arts, entertainment, media, and travel industries. So with more than 25 years of experience, he has run the legal department of 2 major entertainment industry labor organizations. But he was also named Labor Council of the Year by the Association of Media and Entertainment Council in 2012, and has previously served on the executive board of the International Federation of Journalists and the AFL-CIO Lawyers Coordinating Committee. So he participates in the International Forum for Travel and Tourism Advocates, and is the founder of Huckleberry Travel, an award-winning travel business, attorney advertising, and just always is just really going to be helpful for here because he has both sides of this industry, and we're just so excited to have you here, Thomas. So thank you so much again for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for having me and for that introduction. And I guess I should just say at the outset that I hope that everyone is staying safe and well. I feel like I'm probably not the first person who said we're all in this together, but it really is true. We are all in this together, and I'm really happy to do what I can to help help all of us who are functioning as travel advisors. So as Stephanie mentioned, just a little bit about me. I am an attorney. I have clients in the travel industry, but I also own a small travel business, and I am a travel advisor as well. I need to make, because it's an interactive forum, I need to make the disclosure that this should be viewed as attorney advertising, just to be consistent with my professional responsibilities. My address and phone number are on the screen, which I'm also required to share with you, not that I'm going into that office these days. A couple of other disclaimers. This webinar is not intended to provide any specific advice to anybody who's participating. It's for informational purposes only. The webinar is not creating any kind of an attorney-client relationship, and based on anything that I discuss here, the prior results that I might describe don't guarantee any future outcomes. So now that that's out of the way, obviously travel worldwide has ground to a halt because of novel coronavirus, COVID-19, and that has provided a number of challenges to those of us who are working as travel advisors. And so there are a couple of things that I want to talk about today. The first,
Thomas, really quick, it looks like your screen is blank white right now.
oh,
So just want to see.
Let me see here. The screen is white, so let me see here. Let me see here. Oh,
yeah, no problem.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. So I see.
Okay, how about there? Can you see it now?
Yeah, so right now it says advising clients and advising risk. Is that the good one?
Okay, yep, we're
Bingo,
caught up.
nice.
Okay.
Awesome, cool. All right, go for it.
Okay, so four main things that we wanted to, that I'm hoping to talk about today. The first is to talk a little bit about how to answer questions about whether or not it's safe to travel. Second thing that we're hoping to talk about is the importance of having a terms and conditions document that can protect your business from legal risk. Third thing, understanding supplier and vendor policies, their terms and conditions, cancellation policies, and we're going to talk a little bit about force majeure provisions as well. And finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of comprehensive travel insurance and selling travel insurance. So, okay, I think you can still see me. Travel
yes.
Okay, great. So travel, as you may know, is a high risk industry. And just because you might be sending your clients to Las Vegas doesn't mean that you should be gambling with your business. There are a few things here that I put in the side to just kind of underscore how risky it is to just be in this industry. Obviously, there are scams, chargebacks, debit memos. People understand that. There's the difference between a travel agent and a travel advisor. We started calling ourselves travel advisors lately, and that's because we are working on behalf of our clients to give them advice about how to travel and to facilitate their travel. But when we book that travel for them, we're actually acting as a travel agent, and you're actually serving as the agent of your suppliers, the cruise lines, the tour operators, the DMC, or the resort. And there are some inherent tensions in having your loyalties be to both your suppliers and to your travel clients. And that tension opens up areas where there might be legal risk. In terms of handling client payments, if you are handling client funds, that opens up a whole bunch of legal risk. On the other hand, even if you're just using your client's payment information to make the payments directly with a vendor, how you store those credit card numbers and payment information, that can also create areas of legal exposure. When you're entering into contractual relationships, hypothetically speaking, you're taking out a block of rooms for a client You've got a contract with the hotel. The client hopefully has a contract with you. Again, there are overlapping contractual relationships, and that can open up areas where there might be legal risks. And anytime your clients travel, they are subjecting themselves to inherent risks of travel. Things can go wrong when you're traveling, and that could cause a client to try to come after you potentially. So those are just some of the areas where, if you think about all of those different areas where there could be potential legal problems, and then you layer on the fact that we're dealing with a global pandemic on top of that, that just amplifies and compounds the risks that we deal with in our businesses every day. So going to the first thing that I said we were going to talk about, if your client asks you, is it safe for me to travel? This was a question we were getting, I think, a couple of months ago when we were first starting to deal with COVID-19. But now we're getting a slightly different question, which is it going to be safe to travel in September or over the holidays or in 2021? And we are travel advisors, so of course our clients are looking to us for advice about whether it's safe to travel, when they should travel, how they can travel safely. But I think it's really, really important to be careful not to answer that question definitively, because none of us can really turn to the back of the book and see how this is going to end. I was just on a webinar earlier today. I don't know if anybody was on Vicky Fried's Coffee Talk today, but the question came up: when is Royal Caribbean going to start sailing again? And they can't say, and so we can't say either, of course. And then when you compound that with the fact that every traveler has a different tolerance for risk, so not everybody has the same comfort level. The way you answer that question of when is it safe to travel again is going to be different for everybody, really. And I think the best thing that we can do when we're talking that through with our clients is to direct them to an objective source of information. And here are a few objective and neutral sources of information that you can rely on. Of course, there's the World Health Organization, the Center for Disease Control, and the US State Department. But in addition to that, ASTA and CLIA, our industry trade associations, have really developed some phenomenal resources. And I just want to put a plug in here, especially for ASTA. If you're not already an ASTA member, they have been working overtime to protect travel advisors and doing a terrific, terrific job of it. And I just think that personally, in my travel business, my membership in ASTA has provided so much value just in the last couple of months, not to mention all of the things that they've been doing over the years. So I just want to give a shout out to them. But these are all sources of information that you can either access for yourself to relay to your clients, or places where you can direct them where they can get information to help them make an informed decision. And by encouraging them to make the decision rather than giving them advice, you're actually serving to protect your business. Wanted to talk a little bit about the politics and the current events surrounding coronavirus, because there's a lot of information out there and everybody has lots of opinions. And it's very easy when you're having a discussion about current events to express an opinion about what's going on. And certainly when you're in the business of being a travel advisor and people are paying you, definitely paying you if you charge fees, but even if they're just hiring you to plan a trip for them, they're looking to you for advice, and it would be very, very easy for them to take an opinion that you might not have intended to be your professional recommendation and to turn that into something that they take as your advice about whether it's safe to travel, and you certainly wouldn't want a client to turn around and come after you because they interpreted what you said to them as being something that caused them to spend a lot of money on a trip that didn't happen, or even worse, could potentially compromise their health. And so my best advice would be to just stay away from making comments about whether it's too early or too late to reopen. Those things, in addition to potentially offending a client and driving them away for that reason, could also cause them to make decisions because they took it in a way that you didn't intend them to. Wanted to talk a little bit about terms and conditions documents as well. Terms and conditions documents are really, really important in terms of helping you manage your legal risk. When Stephanie introduced me, she mentioned that I'd worked for a couple of large labor organizations, and as the chief legal officer for those organizations, when those boards of directors were making decisions about new policies that they were going to enact, we'd always get the question, well, if we do X, Y, or Z, is that going to lead us to get sued? Is somebody going to sue us if we do this thing that we're debating? And my answer always is, well, you could actually be sued for pretty much anything. And just because you are on the receiving end of a lawsuit doesn't mean that you've done anything wrong. But even a frivolous lawsuit can be really expensive and time consuming to defend. And so a terms and conditions document is really geared toward protecting your business, because if you get your clients to agree to that when you're in the process of booking travel for them, they can't come back to you later and say, well, you never told me this, you never told me that. It gives you an opportunity to point to your terms and conditions document and say, well, actually, you might not have read it or you might not have paid attention to it, but it is in there and here it is. So some of the things that when I'm drafting terms and conditions documents for my clients who are travel advisors and tour operators, I often put in some of the legally required disclosures. If you're selling air tickets, that would be something like the hazardous materials disclosures, or maybe even the insecticide warnings. Pricing validity, payment schedules, passports, visas, and immunizations. If you forgot to tell the client that you need a visa to go to this particular destination, having that in your terms and conditions document and being able to point to it later to say, actually, I make that advisory as a matter of course, it's in my terms and conditions document. Force majeure, also sometimes known as an act of God provision. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Advisories about safety and security. I routinely include links to those, to the CDC website, the State Department, the STEP program. Those things are in my terms and conditions documents that I draft for clients so that the client can access that information. An advisory about insurance. Travel insurance is something that that I recommend to my travel clients routinely as a matter of course, and that helps protect me against liability because the client can't come back to me later and say, well, you didn't tell me I had the option to purchase insurance that would have protected me against X, Y, and Z. Waivers of liability, disclaimers of warranties, and then also the choice of law forum and arbitration. Obviously, if you're a travel advisor in, let's say, Connecticut, and you've got a client in Arizona, it's going to be a lot easier and more cost-effective for you to defend a lawsuit that's filed in your own backyard rather than something that's filed in a court far from where you live. And an arbitration or alternative dispute resolution provision, arbitration is generally less expensive and time consuming than dealing with a court of law. And so it can sometimes be helpful to have an arbitration provision. There are a lot of terms and conditions templates that are out there. I know there are a lot of websites in the industry that have documents that you can download. The one thing I would just say about that is to be really, really careful if you're using some boilerplate or a cookie cutter terms and conditions document, because every business is different and every business operates in a different way. And I think there's a lot of value in having a document that's really crafted toward the type of business that you run and the way you operate your business. The other thing to note about some of those form documents that are out there is that actually I've noticed that a couple of them have some intentional typos in the documents. They'll use the number 1 instead of the lowercase l, or they'll use a 0 instead of an O. And generally, I think the people who put those documents up there put those intentional typos in there so that they can kind of Google their typo basically and find out who's using their form documents just to kind of see what's out there. But if there's an attorney who is reviewing your terms and conditions document and they see that there's a typo in there that's like that, they're going to automatically know that you haven't taken the time to actually craft a finely tuned terms and conditions document. And it's going to make it a lot easier for them to poke holes in it if it doesn't really apply to your business and it's just something that's cookie cutter. So just a little heads up about that. That being said, something that you pull down off of the internet and read through carefully and tailor to the specifics of your business is going to be much, much better than not having any kind of terms and conditions document at all. So want to move toward talking a little bit about supplier policies and legal risk. So the one question that has come up a lot is, well, if I sell somebody a trip and something goes wrong and the supplier, it's really the supplier's fault, am I going to be responsible for selling somebody a trip where they got injured, they got hurt, they contracted coronavirus, for example? Well, the good news is that in most cases, you shouldn't have a problem with liability if you're truly acting as a travel advisor and you're not acting as a tour operator. But do you have a terms and conditions document that clarifies that you are the travel advisor or the travel agent and not the actual provider of the travel services? Do you handle client funds directly? Is that money going through you on its way to your suppliers? That can create problems for you with seller of travel laws, depending on how you've registered with California. It could present problems for you in your contractual obligations to your host agency if you're a hosted agent. So you need to be careful about that. But it also could be sending the signal to your clients that you're not the travel advisor, you're the actual provider of travel. And that's a very, very different area of legal risk to deal with. And then lastly, how do you market your spec groups? If you are sending out to your clients an email that says, hey, come to Morocco with, I'll use my business, Huckleberry Travel, come to Morocco with Huckleberry Travel, do your clients really understand that that they're going on a Globus trip or a G Adventures trip, or they're traveling with Alexander and Roberts or Abercrombie and Kent? Or do they think that they're traveling with you and that it's solely and completely your thing? You can make that clear in a terms and conditions document, but I can't tell you the number of times I've had clients who think that they're paying me even though their credit card statement should have the name of the vendor, and they think that because we're escorting the group trip that it's a trip that we've put together rather than the DMC that we're using or the tour operator. So those are things that you can do to kind of clarify where the lines are between you and your suppliers for your clients. Supplier policies, I think it's really, really important that you don't guess and guess wrong, because if you think you know what the supplier's policies are, and you know, if you've dealt with airline policies over the last several months, you know that they change on a daily basis, sometimes even more than once a day. It's important to make sure that you don't give an answer before you've actually looked it up and verified. When you initially book the trip, I think it's really a good idea for you to send copies of the supplier's terms and conditions to your client. I know Stephanie said we weren't going to talk about Travefy, but if you're using Travefy to prepare an itinerary, you can easily upload the supplier's terms and conditions to that itinerary as an attachment. You can email it to them. There are all sorts of ways you can get those supplier's terms and conditions to the client. That's a good practice to put in place. And if a supplier is making an exception to a policy, I think it's really important that you let the client know and make sure that they understand that it was an exception to the usual policy. We have so many suppliers now who have put in really flexible and generous policies regarding cancellations, but if you get something that's non-refundable refunded, it's important to let your client know that that was you. Well, first of all, you're patting yourself on the back. You're telling them that you did a good job for them because you got them to make an exception to their policy. But it'll also help you because the next time that client books something with you, they might have a misunderstanding of what the policy is and how it operates. They might think that, oh, I can make that non-refundable booking and I'll just talk to Julie, because Julie's an awesome travel advisor, and she can just get them to waive that policy whenever she picks up the phone. I think it's a good idea to let them know that these are not normal times, and that just because you got it refunded this time, or just because you got them a future travel credit this time, doesn't mean that you're going to be able to do that in the future once we're on the other side of it. Supplier deadlines, really, really important that, again, we have lots of generous and flexible policies that we're getting from suppliers, but don't assume that you're covered. Just because most suppliers are being flexible and generous doesn't mean that they all are. And you should really pay close attention to your payment deadlines, your release space for your groups. And if you do blow a deadline and it causes your clients to incur a penalty that they're going to be stuck with, you're going to have to really think about whether or not it's going to be necessary for you to file a claim with your E&O insurance. In some cases, if the amount is small, you may want to make the cost-benefit analysis that it's going to be better for you to pay that penalty out of your own pocket rather than risk getting a negative review online or losing a valuable client. But you're going to have to really, think about that. But just a reminder that it's really, really critically important that you look at when the penalties kick in, especially on your group contracts. If you're about to hit a threshold where suddenly the penalty goes from 25% of the room block up to 75% of the room block, and your client is on the fence about whether they're going to have to postpone their wedding, you might want to give the client a call because they might not be thinking about the fact that they're going to potentially be on the hook for a lot more money if they delay making that decision by a week. Okay, force majeure and other contractual provisions. So force majeure is more commonly known as the act of God provision, which basically says if there's a fire, flood, pandemic, quarantine, national strike, et cetera, that the force majeure provision kicks in, and that excuses performance of an element of a contract. But the devil is in the details, and some things are specifically included in a force majeure, and some things are not. And I've seen force majeure clauses that include pandemics and quarantines, and I've seen clauses that don't. And I've even seen some force majeure clauses where performance of the contractual obligations is excused on one side, but the payment is not. So the worst case scenario, you wouldn't want to have a situation where your supplier doesn't have to make good on their contractual obligations, and yet you still have to pay them. And I know that sounds horrible and unfair, but those provisions exist out there, and it sometimes is the case that that's what you're dealing with. There's some other contractual documents as well that could help you in excusing performance of a contract. Impossibility, illegality. There's a doctrine called frustration of purpose, commercial impracticability. These are all doctrines that can provide relief from a contractual obligation, but generally they really require something to trigger them that is out of the control of any of the parties. So impossibility, for example, because if it's impossible to perform a contractual obligation, that doesn't mean it's difficult or stressful to perform those contractual obligations. Impossibility has a specific legal meaning, and so if your client is saying, but it's impossible for me to travel right now, it might not be technically impossible. It might just be ill-advised or difficult. So another way this comes into play is with travel advisories. Early on in the pandemic, when people were trying to cancel their trips, I had clients ask me all four of these different questions. Some of them were travel clients that were asking me, some of them were legal clients, but people were really kind of misunderstanding what the effect was of a travel advisory. If there was a level 3 advisory to Italy, that means I can't travel, right? Well, no, it doesn't. It just means that they advise that you not travel. Now it's become more complicated because borders have shut down and flight schedules are reduced. But again, in terms of your contractual obligations, I'm sorry to say that the existence of a travel advisory in and of itself is probably not going to relieve you from contractual obligations. You're going to have to dig a little bit deeper and try to work it out with your suppliers if you're coming up in a situation where travel is very, very difficult, but not strictly speaking impossible or illegal. And lastly, I just want to talk a little bit about insurance. I have a number of colleagues in my network, in my host agency, who are really, really put out by the fact that most insurance policies are not covering cancellations related to COVID-19. And I know how difficult that is to have that conversation with a client that doesn't understand, well, what do you mean I purchased insurance and they're not going to cover my cancellation? And I've even heard some travel advisors say, I'm not going to sell travel insurance anymore. I'm just not going to deal with it. It's too much of a hassle. And I think that that is, my personal opinion is that's a huge mistake. I think you should always, always, always be quoting insurance to your clients, because again, that helps you manage the legal risk and reduce the risk that you're going to get sued. Whether it covers COVID-19 or not, a comprehensive travel insurance policy will go so much farther beyond just the cancellation protection and includes things like trip interruption, medical evacuation, emergency medical coverage, lost and delayed baggage, all of those things. And so it's just really important that your clients might not be thinking about all of those things, but once they need it, if they don't have it, they could potentially decide to come after you because you didn't tell them that it was available to them. I think you should always make the disclaimer when you're selling an insurance policy that you are not an insurance broker. If your clients have questions about the terms of a policy, it's always a good idea to get your rep from whatever insurance provider you use, get them on the phone and have them talk it through with your client. And I would say just work it into your workflow so that as a matter of course, you're always sending a quote for insurance to your clients right after they make their deposit on their trip. If it's a routine thing for you, chances are you won't miss a beat and you'll be able to hit the ground running with that. And then the other thing I think is really important is to offer options and alternatives. When in my travel business, when I have a client and I send them a quote for insurance, I'll send them, I may not send them a quote that includes cancel for any reason, because my personal opinion is those are really expensive and they don't necessarily provide the kind of coverage that people are going to be looking for. People might not understand it, but I do send them a quote for the policy that my clients select most frequently. But then I always put in there, when I send them the quote, here's the policy that here's a quote for coverage that my clients most frequently put in place. There are other levels of coverage available and other options, and I'd be happy to send you a quote for one of those other options if you'd like to see what else is available. And sometimes they ask me, what that means, but other times they don't. But the fact that I've actually made them aware of the fact that just because I'm sending them a quote for what I think is a good policy doesn't mean that there aren't alternatives out there. And that, I think, makes it less likely that they can come back to you and say, yeah, but you didn't tell me cancel for any reason was an option. I would have picked that if you told me about it. At least you're giving them the opportunity to understand that what you're sending them is just one policy of many that are out there. So the key takeaway from all of this, just going back to what we were saying earlier, is you're operating in a high-risk environment, and COVID-19 has made selling travel even more risky than usual. And even if you're doing everything right, you could still find yourself on the receiving end of a frivolous lawsuit that could be time-consuming and expensive to defend. And so These few things that these are just a few things that you can do to really protect yourself and to protect your business, to be careful about how you answer questions and be careful what you share on social media, to have a terms and conditions document that provides protection for your business, to really make sure that you understand the supplier policies and how important those are. And lastly, to don't overlook insurance just because it doesn't cover COVID-19. It could cover lots of other things that your clients might need. And if they don't get that coverage, that could be an area where you're taking on risk that you don't need to take, on. So that is, those are my key takeaways, and that's pretty much it. So if you've got any questions, I will. I guess I can stop sharing my screen at this point, and I don't want to
Or
disconnect,
if you
or I can
can
just
keep
leave it
that
there.
effect. Yeah,
Okay.
I was gonna say, because we actually had a lot of people asking for that email. So that's perfect.
So that's the email for my law practice. And if you're interested in my travel business, I'm at Huckleberry Travel, which is Huckleberry, Huckleberry travel.com, and that's me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Thomas. That was so much information that's very, very helpful, especially in this time. I learned a lot of new things in that. That's awesome. And we have so many questions that came in too, Thomas, that
Okay.
just a heads up. I know we'll only have like 20 minutes here, but I also want to mention that some of the questions are very detailed. So if you're unable to answer them in this format, just let us know. We can move to the next one.
Okay.
And then I know that, so the first one was that a lot of people are asking for your email. So
Okay.
that is helpful. Okay, so let's go here. So Lois and many other agents, this was a very popular question, and you mentioned this too, is that are there any samples of terms and condition documents that can be shared?
There are, and there are lots that are available out there, and I'm trying to think of where I've seen some of them. I think the host agency reviews website may have links to some documents. There's also there's a bulletin board, the travel professionals bulletin board. I think I've seen links to documents there. You can actually go to certain suppliers. There are some travel advisors who put their terms and conditions document on their public-facing websites. I think one thing that I didn't really talk about is your terms and conditions document. If you, I think how you get your clients to agree to it is almost as important as what's in the document. And and there are a lot of travel advisors who kind of put it on their website and it just sits there. They don't actually do anything to direct their clients to their terms and conditions. They don't present it to them at the time that they're booking. And I think it's really important to build it into your workflow. One of the ways in my travel business, the way we get our clients to agree to it is when we send our clients the new client information form that we use to get all the information that we would need from them in order to make a booking, name, address, phone number, date of birth, those types of things. We include a couple of check boxes on that form. And one of those check boxes is that we're advising them that they should purchase travel insurance, that we recommend travel insurance. One of them is that that they agree that they're hiring us to plan a trip, that they understand our fee structure because we do charge fees, and then and that they agree to our booking terms and conditions. And then we have a link there. So I think that's a good happy medium because you're not actually, waving a bunch of legalese in front of them and causing them to freak out and run screaming in the other direction because they think, what am I getting into?
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're giving them the opportunity to read the terms and conditions and review it if they want to, and you're affirmatively getting their agreement to it. And so I think that's important. But you can find those terms and conditions on some websites.
Awesome. And actually, you answered the next question too, because Cynthia had asked, do you have to send the client the terms and conditions, or if it is posted on your website, is that okay? She also said, and on my registration form, I have it listed. Is that good enough? So that's kind of what you were saying.
Yeah, exactly. And there are all sorts of places where you can make an electronic form. You could email it to them. You could have them send you an email back just saying, hey, just here's a link to my terms and conditions. Can you just send me a quick email back that you've read it and agree to it? I mean, that I think is a little bit clunkier. The goal is, I think, to make it smooth and seamless, but not to just leave it sitting on your website and hope that they stumble across it.
Yeah, sure. So another question here from Jacqueline is, do you recommend hiring an attorney who specializes in travel versus general business law?
Yeah, so I have found um, that general business attorneys are really good at doing general business things, but this industry is really, really different than other industries. And so most of my clients in my law practice uh, they're often referred to me, somebody starting a new travel business, and they go to a small business lawyer to put together their LLC, for example. But then once they realize that this industry is pretty highly regulated, and if you're selling travel to clients in California, even if you're not in California, that you need to be registered as a seller of travel, and it takes time for a lawyer who's not familiar with the industry to become familiar with the travel and tourism industry. And so there are quite a few of us who do this kind of law, and if it's transactional in nature, I'm not going into a court in a different state. So I do have clients in other parts of the country. But going back to ASTA has an attorney referral program. If you're an ASTA member, attorneys who participate in that attorney referral program, you can get a free initial consultation, and after that, a discounted rate. For an attorney who participates in that program. I participate in it, I think the Host Agency Reviews website also has a link to travel industry attorneys who specialize in the travel and tourism industry.
Awesome. And a question that just came in that I'm just going to go ahead and say because it fits this one so well is Kristen asked, is it better to send a document to a lawyer to look over or create one from the ground up with a lawyer? Also, is it best to set up a consultation with the lawyer first to discuss business before starting the creation process?
If you're talking about your terms and conditions document, I guess it kind of depends on who your business. Like I've got travel industry clients who've been in business for 30 years, and they're just now getting around to writing up a contract with their ICs. And like, oh, I've been meaning to do this, and yet they've been
Yeah.
working together really well, right? And everything's been fine. I've got other clients who've been in business for a long time as a sole proprietorship. They're just now thinking about forming an LLC. And so I think that answer is probably going to be different for everybody based on what your business looks like and how long you've been in business, whether you have sub-agents or independent contractors, whether you're hosted or whether you're ARC accredited. All of those things are really going to be different. So I think it might make sense. I mentioned that ASTA has the attorney referral program has a free initial consultation with attorneys who participate there. Might be a good way to kind of talk it through with an attorney who participates in that program about what they think you might want to do next.
Awesome. And so this is another topic that we're getting some questions around so Mark had asked, what's your opinion on the ability to prevail on credit card disputes if services can't be rendered due to COVID-19?
Oh, I mean, chargebacks are just a huge issue for everyone, and I think I was actually having this conversation with a colleague, another travel advisor who's been in the travel industry much longer than I have, and he made the point, which I think is a really good point, that especially uh, for travel advisors, that thing that I was saying earlier about how we're travel advisors, but we're also travel agents. And so if you're selling an airline ticket, if you're on a GDS and you're selling an airline ticket and your client disputes the credit card charge as a way to do an end run around the fare rules, that puts you in a horrible position because you're going to be the one getting the debit memo. So in terms of the likelihood of prevailing, every fact scenario is different. The fare rules are different for every ticket. I've got clients who are traveling on the exact same itinerary, but they got different fare rules for their tickets, and one of them has the opportunity to get that ticket refunded, and another one I'm going to have to do battle with the airline. So it's just that's a complicated question to answer.
Yeah, yeah, I know, and there's a lot of it, and it's just a muddy mess.
Mhm.
So another question here, I think this is a really good one from Romita here. So going back to terms and conditions, is given the COVID-19 situation, does it make sense for me to have it revisited to see if any updates are needed?
Uh, it, it, I think it does. Maybe not necessarily just because of COVID-19, but for all sorts of reasons. I mean, I just sent an email recently. I think in my bio it mentions that I participate in the International Forum for Travel and Tourism Advocates, which is a group of travel industry lawyers. Went to a conference in early March where we spent a lot of time talking about COVID-19, and as a result of that conversation, I got all sorts of, my wheels started turning. I started thinking of all sorts of things that I should start putting into these documents when I draft them for clients. Send out a bunch of emails saying, "Hey, add this paragraph to that thing that I did for you 2 months ago." And so I don't think it's ever a bad idea to take a look at it every few years. And certainly when there's been a sea change in the way the industry is operating, it's probably not a bad idea to take another look at it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So another question here. So we had some questions around this when you were talking about tour operators and just the liabilities they have. So Tara asked, you mentioned that tour operators have different liabilities with supplier services. Can you explain briefly how that works so we advisors know what to ask when screening partners?
Right. Well, so I think what I was referring to there was the kind of thing where, uh, okay, so here's an example. When because I'm on these lists of travel industry attorneys, I got a call from a lawyer who was representing a traveler who wanted to sue a big tour operator. And the basis of the lawsuit was that the tour operator told the guy that the castle was 100 feet from the bus, and it turned out to be 500 feet from the bus, and the guy was old and he slipped and fell. And so that traveler was suing the tour operator. Um, but it's possible that if there's ambiguity about who the tour operator is and they think that you're responsible for selling them that trip, and if you don't have a terms and conditions document that makes it clear what the relationship is between you and the tour operator, that could be a place where you're stepping into some legal risk that you really don't need to take on. In that case, the tour operator got sued. The travel advisor didn't. Travel agent didn't. But it's entirely possible that if somebody's going to file a lawsuit, they're going to, you know, throw everything up against the wall to see what sticks. So that's kind of what I was talking about. In terms of other things, I know we're all concerned about suppliers that might not make it through this difficult time. And in terms of how to vet those suppliers to decide who you want to work with, the first thing I would do is really pay attention to the industry trade publications. When Cox and Kings went under, there were a lot of red flags that went up before that happened. Expedia has been having a lot of difficulty, and it's not really clear to me what's going to happen with them. So I would say read read the travel publications, including Skift. I think Skift has, has a different take on the industry than Travel Weekly and Insider Travel Report. But it's worth it to take your time to kind of see whether there are red flags for those suppliers. And then the other thing I would just say is, oh, I lost my train of thought. I had another point. It was going to be really brilliant too, and I just forgot what it was. I'll come back to it
Well,
if it comes up again.
yeah, I was gonna say, come back to it if you think of it. Um, another question here, unless you think of that, is from Sarah. She said, "Can you speak a bit about states with SOT laws? I'm concerned that I need to avoid selling anyone who lives in those 5 states."
Well, you should avoid selling to people in California if you're not registered as a seller of travel in that state, or if you're not hosted by an agency that's registered as a seller of travel. California, there are other states that require registration, of course, and if you're a hosted agent, your host agency has probably run the traps so that you don't have to worry about it. But California is the state that will come after you if you're selling travel to people in California and you're not properly registered there. It's not that difficult to register in California, but I will tell you that I had a client, not a travel advisor, a tour operator, that had sold a tour to somebody in California. They're a new tour operator. They weren't registered, and when they finally got around to registering with California, they actually had to pay a penalty because their registry was late. So you can take care of it by paying a fine, but why pay a fine when you don't need to? So I would say you can register as a seller of travel. It's not that hard to do. People do it all the time. Lots of people are registered, or you can associate with a host agency that's taking care of that for you, and they can give you advice about whether you need to be registered in addition to having your host agency's registration.
Awesome. Yeah, great stuff to know there. I also want to mention too, lots of questions, and I know we're getting close to wrapping it up here. So the last question I have for you is from Deborah. She said, "Are you taking on new clients in your law practice right now?"
Well, my travel business is not exactly booming these days, so I am, yeah.
Awesome. That's good. You might be getting some people asking questions because, like I said, we've had so many, and I know we just have 5 minutes left here, but I want to go ahead and just take that time to thank you so much, Thomas, for joining us. This is so extremely valuable. It's just is the deep nitty gritty stuff of the travel industry that's so important and valuable to know. That just really thank you again for sharing everything with us here today.
No thanks necessary. And anytime you want to talk about travel law stuff, give me a ring. I'm happy to chat with you.
Well, perfect, great, and with that being said, too, I just want to let you. Is there anything else that you want to end with or share with anybody before we leave today?
No, just that, as I said before, all of us in the industry are really dealing with a lot of unreasonable levels of stress. And I really do hope that everybody's taking care of themselves and that you're all safe and well. And it's become a cliche at this point, but nothing lasts forever. We will get through this. This too shall pass. And hopefully we'll all emerge on the other side um, stronger than ever and better equipped to deal with whatever new challenges are on the horizon. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to chat with you all.
Yes, and absolutely so true. And thank you so much again, Thomas, and thank you everyone else too for joining us. And everyone enjoy the rest of their day as well. See you later.
Thank you.